والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إلى علمنا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Uh, inshallah, we'll continue with the book known as the Musannaf of Abu Bakr Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Shayba rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 235. And we've reached this section that the author, he says, في الرجل يتوضأ أو يغتسل فينسى اللمعة من جسده. This chapter is regarding a person if he is making wudu or he takes a ghusl and he forgets a small portion of his body, a lam'ah, right? A gleaning, a shining, a spot of his body. If a person is making wudu or taking a ghusl and they forget a spot of their body, i.e., what should they do? Right? We know that from the wudu and from the ghusl is that the water must cover the entirety of the adhu. And the statement of the people of fiqh is that it must cover the entirety of the limb. So if a person forgot a spot, then what should they do? Is it okay? It's not that much of a concern if they missed a small portion. Is it something that they need to go back and just wash that spot, even if they've already finished their wudu or their ghusl and time has passed? Is it something that they need to remake the entirety of their wudu? Do they have to start all the way over? Or their ghusl, do they have to start all the way over and remake it? Especially if time has passed. What should the person who has forgotten a small spot of their body when washing for wudu or a ghusl, what should they do? So that's what the author is going to bring here. And obviously there are a multitude of statements in this issue. Whether it is done out of forgetfulness or obviously not on purpose, that's something different. Whether it was something that was recent, i.e., in the close proximity to them making wudu, or whether it was something that has a lot of time has passed and a little bit or recentness and a lot of time or perspectives. They can change from circumstance to circumstance, from person to person. Do they have to just wash the area, or do they have to start over, i.e., begin their wudu from the beginning? Does it matter which area was missed? All of these things can play somewhat into the response that a person gives. And we've seen some of the narrations that give us some indication of some of these topics. For example, we talked about if you forgot to wipe your head, then can you use the water that's in your beard to wipe over your head after wudu is over, right? And we talked about if a person forgot their feet or they did their feet out of order, right? They did their feet first and then they did their hands after that. Is that acceptable? And so all of these things, they have to be put together in this conversation of what if a person forgets a spot, a small spot on their hand, a small spot on their face. They forgot their feet or a spot on their foot. They didn't wipe the entirety of their head. They left off a spot on their head. They didn't do their ears. They didn't do their mouth or their nose. Like, what differences are there in all of these things? So all of those things can play into the circumstance. And it's not necessary that the author is going to mention all of them in this chapter. But that's why it's important to, as you hear these different views and statements of the Salaf, to kind of put them all together. So like, for example, we know that some of the Salaf say you don't have to wipe the entirety of your head. So if you missed a spot on your head, then there's no problem. We know that some of the Salaf say that the ears are not necessary to be washed. And some of them say that the mouth and nose isn't necessary to be washed, or the ears aren't necessary to be wiped, and the mouth and nose isn't necessary to be washed. And so if you hold that view and that's the spot that was missed, then there's no problem, right? Going inside of the beard. Some scholars, we say it's not necessary to go inside of the beard. So if that's a portion that was left, then there's no problem. So here we have to make sure that we understand what the conversation is about. And it's more general, or should we say even maybe more specific than that. and it is if a person has forgotten a area or a spot on one of the limbs that are necessary to be washed, to exclude the argument of those that say that, well, this portion isn't necessary. Now, Sheikh Ashithri, the verifier of this particular book, he says in his comments regarding the positions of the imams in this issue, and we forgot to mention last time, and so we'll attach it here. He brought a narration from the lost portion of the Musannaf of Abdul Razak in the footnotes. He brings the hadith of Ibn Jurayj on his father, who attributes it to the Prophet ﷺ, even though Abdul Aziz ibn Jurayj, Abdul Malik ibn Abdul Aziz, his father was Abdul Aziz, he wasn't a Sahabi. But he attributes it to the Prophet ﷺ, thus making it mursal. He says that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-wudu min al-qay wa in kana qalsan yaghlibuhu falyatawadda." The Prophet ﷺ said that wudu is because of vomit, projectile vomit, and if it was only qals that has overtaken him, then he should make wudu. He must make wudu. This is a narration that can be found in the lost portion of the Musannaf of Abdul Razak, right? Abdul Razak on, I would want to say Ibn Jurayj and or Ma'mar and Ibn Jurayj on his father, like that, right? Ibn Jurayj, if I'm not mistaken. He says, وأن معمر أن يحيى ابن أبي كثير أن يعيش ابن الوليد أن خالد بن معدان أن أبي الدرداء أنه قال استقى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فأفطر وأتى بماء فتوضأ. Right? He says that on the authority of Ma'mar, the son of on the authority of Yahya ibn Abi Kathir, on the authority of Ya'ish ibn Walid, ibn al-Walid, on the authority of Khalid ibn Ma'dan, on the authority of Abi Darda. He said that the Prophet ﷺ made himself throw up and he broke his fast. And then he was brought water and made wudu. So these are some of the narrations that we forgot to attribute or attach last time that are from that lost portion, or from the footnotes that were attached to this manuscript of the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shayba, that inshallah were from the lost portion of the Musannaf of Abdul Razak. Anyway, back to the point. The author or the verifier, he says regarding this issue about a man who makes wudu or makes a ghusl and forgets to wash a portion of his body or a spot on his body. الشثري حفظه الله, he says, الموالاة في الوضوء فرض عند أحمد والشافعي في أحد قولي وقال مالك الموالاة واجبة تسقط بالنسيان وقال أبو حنيفة هي السنة والقول الأول أرجح وأما الموالاة في الغسل فليست واجبة عند الجمهور خلافا لوجه عند الشافعية. So the Sheikh Ashithri, he is presenting this chapter from the aspect of the individual needs to wash that area that he forgot. But if he washes that area, is it necessary that the washing of that area be something that was done in close proximity of time to when he originally washed it, which they call muwala, that action be washed in sequence, or not in sequence, but in close proximity of time, right? There's no big delay, right? An absence of a delay. So does the individual, when he goes to rewash that spot that he missed, does it matter if there was a delay or not? Sheikh Ashithri Hafidhullah, he says that the issue of no delay, i.e. muwala, is in wudu. The issue of having no delay when making a wudu is an obligation with Imam Ahmed as well as a Shafi'i in one of his views. It is a fard. It is something that must be done. And as far as Malik, then he says this muwala, this no delay, this close proximity of time between washing each extremity, each limb. As far as Imam Malik, he says then al-muwala is an obligation. It's wajib, but it falls off with nisyan. It's different than the fard, or what they sometimes call a rukn, where it's something that whether you forgot or didn't forget, then you have to redo it. As opposed to a wajib, which is something that is not necessary that it be done if it was forgotten. In salat, a wajiba of salat is something that if you forgot to do it, you can rectify with sehu, for example. So here, Imam Malik is saying that it's wajib, you have to do it, but if you forgot, then the obligation is removed. Ash-Shitri hafidhahullah, he says, as far as Abu Hanifa, then he says that it is a sunnah, doing or washing the limbs in close proximity of time to each other with no delay. Then according to the Ahnaf, then this is a sunnah. Ash-Shitri hafidhahullah ta'ala, Sheikh Ash-Shitri, he says, and the first statement is the more preponderant. The first opinion is the stronger opinion. This is that opinion that was attributed to Imam Ahmed, which is his madhab, one of the statements of a Shafi'i. Then he talks about as far as ghusl, because the chapter titles talked about wudu as well as ghusl. Ash-Shitri hafidhahullah, he says, as far as close proximity of time and no delay when making a ghusl, then this is not obligatory according to the majority. The majority of the scholars say that when it comes to a ghusl, there's no time relevance. If I washed the entirety of my body except my feet, and then I left the shower, dried off, put on my clothes, and then went to go wash my feet, then there's no problem with that. My ghusl is still complete once my feet get washed. Now, he says this is the view of the majority, contrary to a statement with the Shafi'iyah. As far as the Shafi'iyah, then they compare ghusl to wudu in one of their views, saying that it is necessary that it be done in close proximity of time with no delay. So that's what the verifier mentions from the statements of the scholars regarding this issue. Now, outside of that, let's read what the Salaf had to say about this topic. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, he says, حدثنا هشيم وابن عليا ومعتمر عن إسحاق ibn سويد العدوي or العدوي قال حدثنا العلاء بن زياد قال اغتسل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من جنابة فخرج فأبصر لمعة بمنكبه لم يصبها الماء فأخذ بجمته فلبها به. Now, this narration, it says that Hushaym and Ibn Ulayya and Mu'tamar narrated to us on the authority of Ishaq ibn Suwayd al-Adawi. And I'm not sure if it's al-Adawi or al-Adawi. I'm pretty sure it's al-Adawi with a fatha. Al-Adawi. Wrong book. Al-Adawi. Ishaq ibn Suwayd al-Adawi. نعم العدوي إسحاق بن سويد العدوي من عدي بن عبد مناف. نعم العدوي. So Ishaq ibn Suwayd al-Adawi, he said that Al-Ala ibn Ziyad narrated to us. He said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he bathed because of sexual impurity. He took a bath once because of janaba. And when he left the bath, when he finished bathing, he saw a lam'ah fi mankabihi or bimankabihi. He saw a small area of his shoulder that no water had touched it. And they call it a lam'ah because, if you're washing and you have a spot of your body that isn't touched by the water, right, the ash, the dryness, it will be as if it's shining compared to the rest of the body that will be dull from the traces of water. So it was as if he saw a shining spot on his shoulder that no water had touched. فَأَخَذَ بِجُمَّتِهِ فَلَبَّهَا بِهِ. فَأَخَذَ بِجُمَّتِهِ فَلَبَّهَا بِهِ. A jumma. This word here is tricky for me. I know it in the Quran. وَتَأْكُلُونَ التُّرَاثَ أَكْلًا لَمَّا وَتُحِبُّونَ الْمَالَ حُبًّا جُمَّة, right? جُمَّتِهِ, جُمَّة. I want to say it's like a handful or he took his jummatihi, but I don't know what it is. So let's see if we can find it. Jim, Jammatihi, Jim Mim, Jim Sin, Jim Ain, Jim Ma'a, Jamama. الجم والجمم الكثير من كل شيء. That's what I know. جمة الكثير من كل شيء. وجمة المركب البحري الموضع الذي يجتمع فيه الماء. وجمة المركب is in البحري is where the water gathers. Okay. ماء جم كثير, an abundance of water. والجموم البئر الكثير الماء. والجمة الماء نفسه. So the word al-jumma is water itself. فأخذ بجمته. So he took some of his water, فلبها به, and he, labbaha, he pasted it on there, or he wiped it on there. فأخذ بجمته. So he took some of his water and rubbed it onto that area. واستجمت جمة الماء شربت واستقاها الناس. والمجم المستقر الماء وأجمه أعطاه جمة وأعطاه جمة الماء, and he gave him a handful of water. طيب. Now, so that's what this means. He took some of his water and he labba, to like paste or to rub, like he rubbed it onto that area. So the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam of Allah, he bathed from janaba or because of janaba, and when he left, i.e. when he finished, he saw a spot on his shoulder that had not been touched by water, and so he took basically a handful of water and rubbed it onto that spot. The next narration, so this shows us about a ghusl, right? It doesn't show anything about time, but it shows us that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam went back and washed that spot after he was done. They say he says حدثنا ابن علي أن يونس أن الحسن أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم رأى رجلا ترك من قدمه موضع الظفر فقال له رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أحسن وضوءك. قال يونس فكان الحسن يقول يغسل ذلك المكان. He says that Ibn Ulayya, he narrated to us on the authority of Yunus, on the authority of Al-Hasan, Hasan al-Basri, that the Prophet ﷺ once saw a man who had left a small spot the size of a nail on his foot, i.e. unwashed. And this is a hadith that is well known, right? Hasan al-Basri here is narrating it, mursalan, but it's a hadith that's well known that the Messenger ﷺ, he saw an individual with a portion of his foot unwashed, the size of a nail, the size of a fingernail. Hasan al-Basri, he says in his narration, he says, so the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said to that person, make your wudu better. Ahsin wudu'ak, fix your wudu, right? Make your wudu better or good. Make your wudu good. Go and make your wudu good. Go fix your wudu. Yunus, the narrator, he said that, so Hasan, he used to say, i.e. wash that spot of the body. So this was the tafsir of Hasan to this hadith. And this is why understanding the hadith are so important, because we might see this hadith and we might not hear, but the hadith in the version that I memorized it in, it is that the Prophet told the individual to go remake your wudu. Again, go redo your wudu. And so this becomes the issue that they build this topic off of. The Prophet told that individual to remake his wudu. They say this is because there was a delay. And so that portion of the body was unwashed, but the rest of the body had dried. And so the individual has to go and remake the wudu from beginning. But then somebody can argue that and say, well, no, the person's body didn't dry, because if it had dried, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference of what was washed and what wasn't. So the body was still wet, but the Prophet still told him to remake the wudu. And then people would say, well, he told him to remake the wudu as a punishment for that individual specifically, as if he had told that person to go make wudu again because of how he didn't do it right the first time after being told to do so. Similar to the individual who was bad in his salah. The Prophet ﷺ made him remake it over and over again, not as a form of punishment, but a form of teaching, so that he would learn how to do it correctly. Even though it's not necessary to tell somebody to pray over and over again like that, when it was the best that they could do. Likewise, some people would say that, no, there's no need for muwala in wudu to begin with, right? And so why did he make this person go remake the wudu when there was no need to do so? Or that the hadith never said that in the first place, because different versions have it in different wordaging. And so all of these things become necessary when you want to start using the hadith as a proof, right? Most of us might know the hadith that the Prophet saw an individual with the size of a nail in his foot that hadn't been washed or touched by the water, and he told him to go remake the wudu. But do we know everything else that goes into this topic from answers? Because here, for example, we see Hassan al-Basri saying that the application of this hadith would be to just go wash that spot. And the word that he used of his version of the hadith was make your wudu better, i.e. go fix your wudu. And it didn't require him to remake it. So that's why there is disagreement in this issue. Even if the madhab that you might have learned provides a hadith about what supports their view, it's not the end of the conversation, right? We have to look at how the hadith is worded, what's the validity of the hadith, the other versions of the hadith, as well as the understanding of the hadith and its application. So all of those things are necessary before you go around issuing verdicts. Yes, you can tell somebody Imam Ahmed said this and he said this because of this hadith. But before you issue verdicts as if your answer is the final statement in this in the topic, it becomes important to know all of the details. And I give an example about this all the time. For example, I was called yesterday by some of our brothers in the penitentiary. May Allah preserve them and make their situations easy. And the brother had a problem with the imam who is praying Jumu'ah after Asr comes in. They're praying Jumu'ah after Asr comes in. And is that grounds to boycott your imam? Right? Is that grounds to boycott and to abandon your imam? And this is outside of the issue of, is there necessary to pray Jumu'ah in prison, etc.? But the point of it is that a lot of times we know our opinion. Well, no, Jumu'ah has to be in the time of Dhuhr. But there are madhahib that say that the time of Jumu'ah goes all the way until Maghrib. So if you caught a raka'at of Jumu'ah before Maghrib, then you've caught Jumu'ah on time. So how could we say that the imam, whether right or wrong, whether out of knowledge or ignorance, is praying Jumu'ah after Asr time? How could that be a valid reason to boycott him and abandon him when this is an opinion that some scholars have? And so this is what we mean when we say it's necessary to learn the issue for the issue, not just because we know our opinion is that sufficient. Because a lot of times we'll start holding others to our standards, not knowing that there's a multitude of other valid opinions in that issue that were held by scholars of the Salaf. And so that's why the reading of these books are so important. So here, an example of this is Hassan al-Basri. His view of that hadith that we've talked about is that if an individual missed a spot, all he needs to do is just go wash that spot. And that is even the case in wudu. And so this would support the view of the Ahnaf, for example, in that regard, and the Malikiyah in that regard. Now, the next narration, they say, حدثنا عبد الرحيم بن سليمان and Hajjaj and Ata and Ubayd ibn Umayr أن عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله تعالى عنه رأى رجلا في رجله لمعة لم يصبها الماء حين تطهر فقال له عمر بهذا الوضوء تحضر الصلاة وأمره أن يغسل اللمعة ويعيد الصلاة. He says that Abdul Rahim ibn Sulaiman narrated to us on Hajjaj on the authority of Ata, on the authority of Ubayd ibn Umayr, that Umar ibn al-Khattab, he saw a man who had in his leg or his foot a spot where no water had touched it when he made purification. And so Umar, he said to him, is this the wudu you go to salat with? Is this the type of wudu you make to go to salat? And he commanded him to wash the area that no water had touched and to repeat the salat. So we see here in this narration that Umar, he only commanded the person to wash the area and to repeat the salat. So this would lend support to the position that there is no causal reality for al-muwala, that the action be done in proximity, because this person had made wudu, prayed, Umar had saw him, and then he commanded him to wash that area and redo the salat. And there's no doubt that that is a lot of time when we start talking about what is al-muwala, what is close proximity of time and no delay. So these are statements that are supportive of the view of the Malikiyya as well as the Ahnaf. And so even though we might be Hanbali, we have to look at this and we have to say, you know what, subhanAllah, this is some of the Salaf who held this view. And we can't just assume that because we have a hadith that we use, that the understanding of the hadith is necessarily the understanding that is valid. We might know the hadith is valid, but is the understanding of the hadith valid? And even though we saw Sheikh al-Shithri, hafidhahullah, in the footnotes, he mentioned that the first position is the stronger position. Here we see that Umar, for example, is contrary to that opinion. And all of this obviously is after you study the chains, right? Because the chains have a large part to play in all of this. The next narration, he says, حدثنا ابن علي and Khalid and Abi Qilabah أن عمر رأى رجلا يصلي قد ترك على ظهر قدمه مثل الظفر or الظفر فأمره أن يعيد وضوءه وصلاته. Now see, here's why we get the problematic issue. Because in this narration, it says that Ibn Ulayya narrated to us on the authority of Khalid, on the authority of Abi Qilabah, that Umar, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he saw a person making salat who had left the amount of a nail of his foot, who had left the amount of the size of a nail unwashed on the top of his foot. And so he commanded him to remake the wudu and salat. He commanded him to repeat his wudu and repeat his salat. And so this version gives credence to the view held by Ahmed in one of the statements of the Shafi'iyya, which is that you have to repeat the entirety of the wudu, because this person was making salat, so a lot of time had passed. And thus he commanded him to repeat the wudu and the salat. While the other person might say, well, no, the other statement of Umar, we have to put them together. And what was meant by repeat here was to finish washing that place. And that's possible. And that's why you have to combine all of these statements together, right? Even though the apparentness of this statement to remake wudu would be to remake it in totality. And so this is why that knowledge of multiple statements and multiple views, and likewise the knowledge of hadith, did somebody narrate by meaning? Because these type of meanings change the understanding of the hadith. And he told the person to go redo his wudu and redo the salat. Does that mean redo it from the beginning or redo the portion that he missed, i.e. rewash his feet? All of that is a possibility, which is why there can be disagreement in this issue, even if there is a proof or a text that we are relying on. The next narration, he says, حدثنا هشيم and العوام and إبراهيم النخعي قال ما أصابه الماء من مواضع الطهور فقد طهر. He says that Hushaym narrated to us on the authority of Al-Awam, on the authority of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. He said that whatever the water touches from the places that require purification, then those places are clean. Like, what does that prove? What does that mean? Whatever the water touches from the areas that require purification, then those places are clean. What does that mean? That means that since those places are clean, they do not require to be rewashed. And so the only areas that require to be washed are the places that the water didn't touch. So if you made wudu or a ghusl and you forgot to wash a particular area, then all you have to do is wash that area, because the places that water has already touched from the things that need to be cleaned, then those things are already clean. You don't need to redo them. And so that is the meaning of this statement of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i here. He is saying that you don't need to redo the whole wudu. You only need to do the area that hadn't been washed, the area that was not washed. And like this, we see where the Ahnaf get their statement from, right? From the mistakes is to always think that the Hanafi madhab is, strange in its origins. Yes, there's some statements against the Ahnaf and some views critical of the Ahnaf, but we have to remember that Abu Hanifa, he learned from Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, who learned from Mansur, who learned from Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who learned from Alqamah, who learned from Ibn Mas'ud, right? And so in Ali, there's going to be these connections to the Salaf. And Ibrahim al-Nakha'i is Salafi, without a doubt. You see what I'm saying? So there is a foundation amongst the Salaf for this view that it shouldn't just be disregarded, for example, because it's the view of the Ahnaf. That is an incorrect, approach to this. And the Salaf of the past, they used to value the scholars who appreciated the Ahnaf and the Hanafi madhab. Abdullah bin Mubarak, Yahya bin Ma'in, other than them, right? Even if there are some criticisms levied against the madhab or individuals therein, right? Their origins and their roots can be found with a lot of the Salaf. Another narration he brings, he says, حدثنا ابن مبارك عن معمر عن زيد بن أسلم قال سمعت علي بن حسين يقول ما أصاب الماء منك وأنت جنب فقد طهر ذلك المكان. Right, now here we have a Atharun Madani, right, a Medinan narration that corresponds to the one from Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who was Kufi. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shaybah, he says that Ibn al-Mubarak narrated to us, yani Abdullah ibn Mubarak, on the authority of Ma'mar ibn Rashid, on the authority of Zayd ibn Aslam, the Imam of Medina, one of the Imams in Medina, who said that I heard Ali ibn Hussein, ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib, Zainul Abidin, right? The famous scholar from the family of the Prophet, from the children of Hussein ibn Ali ibn Hussein. He heard Ali ibn Hussein saying, whatever the water has touched from you when you were in a state of sexual impurity, then that area is clean. Whatever the water has touched from you when you are in a state of sexual impurity, then that area is clean. And like these statements are beneficial, right? For example, if you're taking a ghusl and you use the toilet while you're taking a ghusl, the area that you had already washed was clean, but now you've used the toilet, so it has a minor impurity, a minor hadith, while the area that you didn't wash is still in a major hadith. So even when you finish your major hadith, you now have to make a wudu because you used the toilet while you were making a ghusl. And so you wash the area, but it doesn't remove the entirety of the hadith from you, because the areas that were clean, you have done something to render them minorly impure. So all of these statements can have a benefit outside of the general application of what they're being talked about. Now, another narration, they say, حدثنا معن ibn Isa and Khalid ibn Abi Bakr قال رأيت سالم بن عبد الله توضأ يوما فترك في مرفقه شيئا يسيرا فقيل له في ذلك فغسل ذلك المكان. He says that Ma'an ibn Isa of Khalid ibn Abi Bakr, who said that I saw Salim ibn Abdullah, and he's Salim ibn Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab, one of the fuqaha as-sab'ah. He said, I saw Salim ibn Abdullah making wudu one day, and he left from his mirfaq. Al-mirfaq is the elbow, صح? وَامْسِحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. Now, the elbow. He left a portion of his elbow, a small portion of his elbow unwashed. right? He left a small portion of his elbow unwashed. So this shows us a couple of things. One, that in this view, the elbow is part of what needs to be washed in wudu, right? Because if the elbow wasn't something that needed to be washed in wudu, it wouldn't matter that he left a small portion of it unwashed. So the people who are narrating this, they are narrating it from the view that the elbow is included in the arm when it comes to washing wudu. And obviously there's disagreement about that, but this shows us that this view is that the elbow is part of the arm that needs to be washed. And so he left a small portion of his elbow unwashed. And so something was said to him about that. Somebody said something to him about that. Hey, you left a spot of your elbow unwashed. And so he washed that spot, i.e., he did not start wudu from the beginning and remake it all over. He just washed that spot. He says, حدثنا ابن مهدي and Sufyan and Layth and طاووس في الرجل يغتسل فيبقى منه المكان قال إذا يمسه الماء أو يغسله إذا يمسه الماء إذا يمسه الماء أو يغسله. He said that Ibn Mahdi narrated to us, Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, on the authority of Sufyan, and here's Sufyan al-Thawri, most likely, Sufyan al-Thawri, and Layth ibn Sa'd, and Tawus, right? For Rajul, Ibn Mahdi narrated to us on the authority of Sufyan, on the authority of Layth, on the authority of Tawus, who said about a man who bathes and a portion remains unwashed. Tawus, he said, therefore that person should let water touch that spot or wash that spot. So this is Tawus from the students of Ibn Abbas, one of the imams of Mecca and Yemen, saying this statement. Abu Bakr, he says, Hadathana ibn Mahdi and Shu'bah and Mughira and Ibrahim mithla. Abdul Rahman, he also narrated to us on the authority of Shu'bah, on the authority of Mughira, on the authority of Ibrahim, yani an-Nakha'i, a similar statement. He says, قال حدثنا حرمي ابن عمارة عن شعبة عن عمارة ابن أبي حفصة عن أبي مجلز أنه قال يغسل ذلك المكان. Al-Harami narrated to Al-Harami ibn Amara, he narrated to us on the authority of Shu'bah, on the authority of Amara ibn Abi Hafsa, on the authority of Abi Mijlaz, who said that a person needs to wash that spot. He should wash that spot, i.e., just that spot that was unwashed. Abu Bakr, he says, حدثنا Abu Muawiyah and Al-A'mash and Abi Sufyan and Jabir. أن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه رأى في قدم رجل مثل موضع الفلس لم يصبه الماء فأمره أن يعيد الوضوء ويعيد الصلاة. So here we have a narration. He says that Abu Muawiyah narrated to us on the authority of Al-A'mash, on the authority of Abi Sufyan, on the authority of Jabir, that Umar, he saw a man who had in his foot the size of a fils. And a fils is a coin that they used to use that wasn't made of gold or silver, whether it was made of copper or iron or something like that. And it was a type of currency that they used that wasn't gold or silver. So Umar saw an individual who had the size of this coin of his foot unwashed. No water had touched it. And so he commanded that person to repeat the wudu and repeat the salat. A similar statement to what was mentioned before. He says, حدثنا عبد السلام and Mughira and Ibrahim قال يغسل ذلك المكان. He says that Abdul Salam narrated to us on Mughira on Ibrahim, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, that the person should wash that spot. He says, حدثنا يزيد بن هارون قال أخبرنا مستلم ابن سعيد and أبي علي الرحبي and عكرمة and ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, الرحبي. For some reason I want to say it's الرحبي. الرحبي or الرحبي, I'm not sure. I see it both ways. الرحبي. Most of them, I see Al-Rahbi and Al-Rahabi. Who is this person? He is Abi Ali Al-Rahbi. Let's see if I can figure out his affiliation. It's always good to stop. You don't want to be, from the things that are embarrassing with a student, is that you're in a gathering and you read and you don't know how to read the word. Abi Ali Al-Rahbi. So take your time and try to get the information that you need. Al-Husayn ibn Qais Abu Ali Al-Rahbi. Al-Husayn ibn Qais Abu Ali Al-Rahbi يروي أن ضعيف what's his name? Al-Husayn ibn Qais Al-Rahbi. Al-Husayn Al-Rahabi. That's how they write it here. Al-Husayn ibn Qais Al-Rahabi with a fatha. Al-Husayn ibn Qais Al-Rahabi. No. Now, it says that Yazid ibn Harun, he narrated to us. He said that Mustalim ibn Sa'id informed us on the authority of Abi Ali al-Rahabi, on the authority of Ikrimah, on the authority of Ibn Abbas radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم اغتسل من جنابه فرأى لمعة لم يصبها الماء فقال بجمته فلبها به. This narration here, it's a connected version of the narration that we read earlier from Ala ibn Ziyad. Here, it mentions the chain. It says that Yazid ibn Harun narrated to us. He said that Mustalim narrated to us. Mustalim ibn Sa'id informed us. Mustalim ibn Sa'id informed us on the authority of Abi Ali al-Rahabi, on the authority of Ikrimah, on the authority of Ibn Abbas, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he bathed once because of janaba, and he saw a portion that water had not touched, and so he took some water and wiped it on that area. Naam. The last narration in this chapter, they say حدثنا أسباط and Abd al-Malik and Ata قال يغسل ذلك المكان. Abu Bakr, he said that Asbat narrated to us on the authority of Abd al-Malik, on the authority of Ata, who said that the individual needs to wash that spot. So we see all of these narrations, the majority of them, except the two that were mentioned from Umar, mention only a rewashing of that spot, a rewashing of that spot. While the rest of them, or the other two from Umar, include a washing of the entirety of the wudu again, the remaking of the entirety of the wudu. One second. Give me 1 second. Now, so it gives you a reason to think and understand, because the hadith in this issue, the hadith is that a man أن رجلا توضأ فترك موضع ظفر على قدمه فأبصره النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال ارجع فأحسن وضوءك فرجع ثم صلى. You see here that version of the hadith, it's similar to the version of Hasan al-Basri in Sahih Muslim. It says that the Prophet ﷺ, he saw a man who had made wudu, and he had left a portion of the size of a nail on his foot unwashed. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he saw that and he said, return and make your wudu better. And so the man returned and then he prayed. And so that statement, make your wudu better. Does it mean redo, I do a better job, i.e. redo it all in totality? Or does it just mean fix what you messed up, i.e. wash that spot? And so that's something that you have to understand. Like, this is why there can be disagreement in the issue. Trying to find the version. I'm pretty sure it was in Bukhari as well. I thought a version in Sunan Abi Dawood. He says, "Irji' fa ahsin wudu'ak." Same thing. Go back and make your wudu better. But a version with Ibn Majah, it says, so it commanded him to repeat the wudu and the salah. Right. And so we see here that the hadith has different wordages in different places. So the gist of it is that just because we learn something, it doesn't mean that that is the final answer. Right. Us as Hanabila, for example, myself, I'm speaking of, we learned the issue that the wudu needs to be remade. And we use this hadith as our proof, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this hadith of the Prophet, it could be understood in a different way. It could be understood in the way to just simply fix your wudu. And if that is the case, then there's no compelling evidence to force the issue of muwala, to force the issue of close proximity of time and no delay when making wudu. And then you have here several of the Salaf holding the same opinion. And then even the opinion that is attributed to Umar that could be used to say remake the wudu, it has the same type of argument that you could have regarding fixing the wudu, not remaking the entire thing. And this was his grandson Al-Hasan, As-Salim ibn Abdullah, holding the view that you only need to wash the spot, and Ali ibn Hussein holding the view that you only need to wash the spot. And this is the view of the Imam of Medina, Malik. If you forgot, all you need to do is wash the spot. And the view of Abu Hanifa, that it's only a sunnah, and all you need to do is wash the spot. And a view of Ash-Shafi'i in one of his views, all you have to do is wash the spot. So that gives strong credence to those who hold the view, all you need to do is wash the spot. And so that's just something to learn and to learn from. This is why we learn the statements of the Salaf. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.